speaker's time is protected and as such cannot be subject to points of information. I should have made that explicitly clearer earlier. But without further ado, moving on to our second speaker in opposition of the motion, Professor Matthew Goodwin. Matthew's a professor of politics at the University of Kent and conservative commentator, with his column and research particularly focused on the realignment of British politics away from class towards education. He was a keynote speaker at the 2023 National Conservative Conference. Professor Goodwin, you have the ears of the House.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to begin with a story of something that happened 90 years ago, which is when George Orwell met a Marxist apologist and asked him about these rumors concerning show trials in Stalin's Russia. And the guy said, well, I mean, I've heard something about that, but, you know, sort of downplayed it. But I've heard these rumors about censorship, the crushing of individual liberty, the death of individual freedom. Well, I've heard something about that, Well, I've heard about this strong police state that's sort of murdering people and pushing everybody into famine. Sometimes you need to crack a few eggs to make an omelette. At which point Orwell said, but where's the omelette? That's the point with Marxism. Now, your students who are focused on logic, reason, evidence, proof of concept, I would ask you, where's the proof of concept? If this ideology is going to work in the 21st century, why on earth hasn't it worked in the 20th century? And we can all talk about science fiction novels, and we can talk about, well, Russia didn't quite get it right. But actually, the reason Marxism didn't work was because internally it is an inconsistent, flawed, very dodgy academic theory that does not work when it's applied in reality. Sure. Marxism hasn't worked because it's completely detached from the reality of human nature and economic life. If you want to look at what did happen over the last century, rather than what might happen in the future, what did happen was 100 million people losing their lives. Tens of millions of people being pushed into starvation, genocide, re-education camps, and state coercion. What you did see was famine, was the death of democracy, was the extinction of individual liberty, was the abolition of private property, calls including, by the way, the abolition of the family, children being subjected to capital punishment, the gulags, the incredible censorship, resentment, and repression. Put it this way, if I said to you, you have one choice when you graduate from this university in a year or so, or whenever you graduate, and that choice is between South Korea or North Korea, I wonder which of those you would choose. The reason Marxism failed, and let's be absolutely clear, is the reason Marxism failed, is because Marx was wrong about almost everything. He was wrong when he said nation-states would wither away. He was wrong when he said the workers would revolt. He was wrong when he said the workers would revolt in the most advanced industrial nations. He was wrong when he said the middle class would collapse. He was wrong when he said capitalism would eventually fall under the weight of its own contradictions. He was wrong when he said history moves in a linear direction towards a socialist or Marxist utopia. And more fundamentally, he was wrong, like radical progressives are wrong today, in how he saw human nature. This is why, no matter where you put Marxism, it won't work. It doesn't understand human nature. It thinks that when you satisfy people's basic economic needs, we'll all come together in a moment of harmony and align ourselves with the state, and we'll reach this wonderful moment of liberation. Unfortunately, that's really not who we are. We are imperfect social mammals. We like power. We like wealth. We like status. We want more. And ask yourself the question, are you better off than your grandparents were? You probably were. You probably are. That's because Marxism... If you look at any of the research on global trends in poverty and income over the last half century, take Brookings' recent study as an... Firstly, the reason China has been experiencing more growth in recent years, more advancement in recent years, is partly because it's been moving away from Marxist principles, not because it's been embracing Marxism. If you look at the Brookings Institute, here are two stats to keep in mind. Another reason why Marxism isn't going to work in the next century. In the first 24 years of this century alone, the share of the world that is now belonging to the middle class has increased threefold. Half of the globe now are belonging to the middle class, according to the Brookings Institute. The potential reservoir of support for this future Marxist revolution, I'm afraid, is not increasing. It is dwindling over time. Marx was also wrong, by the way, about the iron law of wages, which is fundamentally why I think this is not going to be making any return anytime soon. Yeah.
Are you aware that Marxism as an ideology does exist beyond Karl Marx as an individual? And there have been a lot more Marxist thinkers since Karl Marx. And Karl Marx doesn't need to be expected to have because there are people talking about degrowth and post-growth and post-scarcity and fully automated luxury communism and all of these other ideas that exist beyond Marx. But you're kind of really focusing in on some guy that, lived in the 1800s and wasn't, a fortune teller.
I'm focusing on what are some of the central ideas that inform Marxist ideology. And one of those being that wages over time are going to be diminished and that increasingly workers are going to be pushed into scarcity and poverty. That is not happening currently. That is not the reality of economic life today.
Can we please be mindful of the fact that it's the prerogative of the paper speakers to decide...
One of the reasons why Marxism fundamentally failed and won't work in the future is because it was outflanked very effectively by liberals in the 19th and the 20th century who understood that by extending the franchise, by honouring individual liberty, by honouring private property, by allowing political systems to deliver the reforms that would increase wages, that would protect private property, that would deliver progressive taxation, the state was able to deliver things like education, like law and order, like political reforms, giving people a sense of recognition within the political system. Marxism never really understood any of that. It never really understood, which is why every Marxist regime around the world, no matter whether it relies on Aaron Bastani or whether it relies on Karl Marx, ultimately has to resort to coercion. Because it doesn't understand human nature. It doesn't understand what we want to aspire to achieve in our lives. That's why it has to fundamentally oppress people. It doesn't understand who we are as social mammals. And furthermore, Marxism was outflanked by the way in which the state evolved. The state now derives its legitimacy from being a nation state. The reason national populists are on the rise across Europe, the reason why I suspect Donald Trump will win the White House this year, and the reason I suspect France will eventually elect Marine Le Pen and Germany will have difficult state elections this year, and Scandinavia is moving to the right. The reason for all of that is because fundamentally, we are living still in nation states where people derive an enormous amount of status and identity and belonging, not from their economic class, but actually from their membership of a wider national group. Yeah.
You say that coercion is the reason. Marxism always relies on coercion because it's escapist in nature. And what I say to that is capitalism relies on coercion, and so do nation states. We're not all patriotic towards our nation states just because we came out of the womb with this feeling of patriotism towards them. Nation states were based on war. They were based on ethnic cleansings. That's how they came about. So I don't know if you're going to make a general anti-coercion point, or if you're going to very specifically target it towards Marxism and not look at how coercion is a feature of every political system ever.
If you can name me one Marxist regime that has not used anti-democratic, oppressive methods to try and control the people, that has free and fair elections, that allows free speech and free expression, and please let me know. There isn't one. There isn't one, exactly, because fundamentally, intellectually, politically, Marxism is a fundamentally flawed ideology. And if it hasn't worked in the 20th century when rates of poverty were much higher, when much more of the globe was in extreme poverty, when we had a much larger working class, then how on earth is Marxism going to work in the 21st century? Thank you.